Hello and welcome to the Nutrition Digest podcast. We are your hosts and registered dietitians, Alicia Kugler, Tara Valenti, and Summer Williams, here to dish up the nutrition tea, dispel the myths, inspire, inform, and hopefully entertain. Today's episode is all about three of the most popular and polarizing health trends: the carnivore diet, the keto diet, and intermittent fasting. We are going to cover what each of these diets actually entails, the pros and cons from a physiological, psychological, and practical perspective, what current research tells us, and who may benefit from these approaches and who may be at risk. But before we dive into the actual content today, I just wanted to know if either of you had any client wins that you wanted to share from this week.
Yeah, I had a really awesome client win with a client on Thursday. I had a virtual check-in with him. I've been working with him for about a year, and when he came to me, he was trying to lose body fat. He was doing functional fitness, and he was tracking his food. But the big thing about him was he was quite fearful of eating food, and it was actually causing him to kind of go through cycles of like overeating and undereating, and like his calories were way too low. And I was really excited because he had an updated body scan done on Wednesday, and his body fat had gone from 25 to 10%, which is crazy. That's gradually over the course of a year, I will say. Yeah. And the biggest thing is he's eating about double as much as he was before.
You're kidding.
Yeah, his goals were about like 13 to 1500 calories. He's not a big person. He's not a tall person.
I hope not. 13 to 1500 calories.
So yeah, he's like 5'3", 5'4". Still way too little when he started to work with me. And then kind of gradually, we initially brought his calories up to like 1800, got him to eating more balanced, increase his protein. And the big thing that we've been working on the last 6 months is understanding how to still live a social life, because he was very fearful of eating out. At one point in time, he was fearful of alcohol. He kind of created a lot of like phobias. And we got into a point where he understands balance, and movement has become such an essential part of his everyday life. He loves walking everywhere, biking. He's like loving fitness, still doing the functional fitness, but pushing it even more than before.
Yeah, probably because he can push it even more because he's actually fueled.
Mm-hmm. He has energy.
Yeah. It was just like, it was such an awesome check-in. And like the fact that he's like, I want to keep going. I'm so motivated. I feel like there's so much balance. He went on vacation like a month ago for a week to Europe. So different foods, different lifestyle. He's like, I didn't train, but I was walking a lot. I didn't stress about food. If I had a night where I indulged, not a big deal. I moved on. And he's like, I actually felt leaner coming back. And I'm like, wins. I love that.
Yeah. That's amazing. Well done. So today we're going to start with the carnivore diet, what it is and how it works. First of all, I like to think of the carnivore diet, which I keep wanting to say is the carnival diet, and it may have to do with that I was a carny and in the circus for a long time, but maybe not. Anyway, I think of the carnivore diet as keto on steroids. So it basically is a zero-carb diet that allows only animal products such as meat, poultry, fish, eggs, seafood, some dairy, and water, but it excludes all vegetables, fruits, grains, legumes, seeds, nuts, and plant-based foods entirely. Let me repeat, it excludes all vegetables. And it's often positioned as an extreme form of the ketogenic diet. Now, what that looks like in terms of a nutrient breakdown is 65 to 75% fat, 20 to 25% protein, and less than 5% carbs, often 0% carbs. And if we think about it again from a basic standpoint, carbs is our body's main source of energy. I just want to throw that out there right now. Obviously, I may be a little biased, but that's not very healthy for most of us.
Also, if you think about 65 to 75% of your calories coming from fat, but all of those fat calories are coming from animal sources. So the majority of that fat is going to be saturated fat.
And we've talked in previously episodes about like seed oils versus saturated fats. And we know that that is not a good thing.
And I feel like we could definitely tangent on this one. But if you're not eating any vegetables, legumes, grains, any of those plant-based foods. Fiber, we know, is a structural component of plants. So if you cut out plants entirely, you're not getting fiber in your diet.
We all know fiber is good for a million things, especially digestion.
Using your colon.
Yeah, we're going to use our colon. That's our key phrase. But let's go back and talk about some of the research-supported benefits of the carnivore diet. And benefits we like to put in quotes. So number one would be weight loss and appetite control. High protein increases satiety. So basically, the whole premise behind that thought process is that protein makes you full. And so if we're full from eating animal protein, we're not going to eat other stuff. Therefore, that can result into weight loss. There's still no fruits and vegetables and fiber in your diet if you're on this. I digress. Number two, type 2 diabetes support. Very low carb intake may reduce insulin needs in the short term. And again, in the short term. Number three, anecdotal improvements in mood, autoimmune symptoms, and chronic pain. Though we have to say that long-term research is very, very limited.
I don't think there's any research study past 3 or 6 months on the carnivore diet. And even some of the original people that were on the carnivore diet from like a few years ago, a lot of them have to like got off of it for various reasons. And I think the actual founder of the carnivore diet ended up with a lot of blood work issues.
That's very interesting. I mean, honestly, it is very popular right now. When we were doing research on this, I saw so many podcasts and influencers who are all over this topic, as carnivore is the right way to go. But let's go into some of the risks and limitations with this. And the main one I would say is increased LDL cholesterol. Now, again, this goes back to what Tara was talking about before. If we're eating only meat products or animal products, such as red or processed meats, these are linked to higher heart disease risk. Also, there's a risk of increased cancer. Higher intake of red meat is associated with colorectal, colon, and breast cancer. You get significant deficiency in your nutrients. It lacks vitamin C, potassium, magnesium, and fiber. It can impact our gut health, reduce microbial diversity due to lack of fiber, and other risks such as kidney stones, gout, osteoporosis, constipation, low energy, poor skin, and mood changes. And finally, an environmental impact. If this isn't enough for you, red meat production contributes heavily to climate change. So the bottom line of the carnivore diet is, in the short term, weight loss may occur, but long-term safety, sustainability, and overall health impact are highly questionable. And I just want to summarize all that just into the fact that, again, we often as dietitians, for many of our clients, recommend a diet that's higher in protein, but that does not mean that this is the carnivore diet. We do not recommend protein instead of the other two macronutrients. It's all about balance. We have the 3 macronutrients in nature for a reason, and our body needs all 3.
And I will kind of add on, like when we talk about deficiencies, just think back. We talked about scurvy with the original settlers in North America. Their issue was they ate a lot of meat and they didn't have access to fruits and vegetables. Why are we bringing back a condition that we haven't seen in how long? Because it's a trendy diet.
Absolutely. And scurvy is the deficiency of vitamin C, in case anybody's unsure about that.
Have any of you worked with clients who have done the carnivore diet?
No.
I've had one person do it for 2 weeks, and then he realized after the 2 weeks that he had gout.
That makes sense. That absolutely makes sense.
I worked with a client who did it for months.
Oh, wow.
Before working with me, obviously, and he came to me because he was trying to optimize his body composition. I find that most of the people that I have met that have been dedicated enough to follow a diet like the carnivore diet are very passionate about their health, and they're very passionate oftentimes about exercise and or body composition stuff. So I knew that he was the type of person who would do whatever it took to get to the goals that he had. But he was stuck and he wasn't progressing and he didn't feel very good. And he was feeling very frustrated after doing all of these months of the carnivore diet. He was like, going down the rabbit hole on YouTube and watching all these videos and believing everything that they said because they're very, very convincing. And I was able to discuss with him everything that we just discussed and why the carnivore diet is not the optimal choice for him and his body composition goals. And it was so cool to transition him off of the carnivore diet and watch him achieve all of his body composition goals.
That's amazing. So he was receptive to it.
Yes, he was ready because it wasn't working. So he knew that he had to switch things up and that maybe this wasn't the right approach for him.
Oh, that's so cool. I've had a lot of clients who have followed the ketogenic diet, the keto diet, and maybe Alicia, you could tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so as we kind of mentioned, like the carnivore is a more extreme version of the ketogenic diet. There are similarities and differences. There's two main differences. What I would say is like with ketogenic diet, they're incorporating both plant and animal sources, and they're revolving around not just meat, but around just high fats in general. So they're going to be focusing on cheese, avocado, tons of butter. We're going to get lots of nuts and seeds in there, but we're also going to be getting like bacon and high fat meat in there. It is very low in carbs, but there is vegetables allowed and some very, very low net carb fruit. So there's a lot of math that is usually involved in the ketogenic diet. And the proposed mechanism is that it's kind of changing our body from using glucose to ketones for energy. And the second major difference that I would say between the carnivore diet and the ketogenic diet is the macronutrient ratios we see. So with the ketogenic diet, we're seeing a lot more coming from fat versus coming from protein. So in the carnivore diet, we're seeing 25% of the calories coming from protein versus in keto diet, it's actually dropped closer to 15% of the calories coming from protein with more of an emphasis on fats. So 75, even in some cases 80%, and about 5 to 10% coming from carbs. So still very low carb, but you still have some carbs coming in the form of fiber. I will say most people that come into my office and say that they're keto are not doing keto. They're doing Atkins, which is just high protein, low carb, moderate fat. So just to make sure that we're distinguishing that ketogenic diet is focusing primarily on fats, not the protein. That's not interesting. The emphasis.
And I think the majority of my clients are absolutely following that breakdown. High protein, followed by fat and very little carbs.
Yeah, and so I know even from my own personal experience, so when I was doing my master's degree, we did a systematic literature review comparing varying macronutrient content diets in terms of long-term weight loss. So we examined the ketogenic diet, Atkins, all of these. And so part of this literature review, in conjunction, we were only doing our own little research study. So we had to go through 2 weeks of these different diets ourselves.
No way.
To put ourselves through it. And so I remember going through the ketogenic diet, and that was the hardest one because at the time I was in the bodybuilding world and I was training for a bodybuilding show. And I found it so tremendously hard to not have any carbs coming in from fuels because you need that for weight training. And even less protein was so hard to wrap my head around. I'm going to talk in a little bit about the ketogenic flu, and that is a very real thing, people. I lasted about a week, and then I had to change it to a modified keto where I had higher protein intake and lower the fat. My insides were a mess. The one thing that I did find is it did actually help me with my periods, which at the time were very screwed up because I was in the bodybuilding world, which is a whole other conversation altogether. That higher fat intake does help a little bit with hormone regulation for some individuals, especially females that are on very low fat diets. I digress. I'm going to talk a little bit more about how the ketogenic diet works. So the big thing with the ketogenic diet is it's trying to push you into ketosis. So that is where our liver breaks down fat into ketone bodies, which is then shifted as the primary fuel source. This can actually produce a slightly acidic pH in our blood due to the ketone production. So you can see in some conditions that you can go to ketoacidosis, which I will talk about in a moment in the diabetic patients. Talking about more the evidence, which I find very interesting, my father-in-law is a pediatric neurologist. So he specializes in little kids below the age of 12 that have epilepsy, that are either not managing well with medication or are medication resistant. And he was telling me about how he uses the ketogenic diet in practice to help regulate these individuals. The ketogenic diet was created as the only way to manage these patients. This was a therapeutic diet. This was not produced as a weight loss diet. I repeat, this was a therapeutic diet, not a weight loss diet. So just take a moment to digest that, no pun intended. So just kind of thinking about that. So when we look at the research from the ketogenic diet, a lot of it is done in individuals that have comorbidities. People that, even like some of the research in the body composition side, it's more done in older adults above the age of 70 that are of higher BMIs and potentially have type 2 diabetes or other kind of comorbidities. And in the type 2 diabetic population, we do see some improved glycemic control and insulin sensitivity, but that's usually, we're looking at that as more of like a short term when someone's newly diagnosed with type 2 diabetes, not necessarily like long term, and it's definitely contraindicated with type 1 diabetes. The other thing with the keto diet, the proposed benefit is ketones really make you feel full. They really reduce the ghrelin hormone. So that's the hormone in your stomach that makes you feel hungry. I know even from my own experiences, I did not have much of like hunger cues or like kind of like that growling stomach. I kind of felt like bleh all the time, but I found that I was never satisfied, but that was a whole other, I needed carbs. In terms of the challenges or the risks, so the keto flu is a real thing. And what that is basically you have headaches, you have irritability. It feels like you are sick and unwell. No matter how much you sleep, your sleep is shitty quality. And so for most people starting the ketogenic diet, this lasts for about 1 week to 2 weeks is kind of like the proposed period before your body enters ketosis. And if you were to slip up, and I will use that in quotations, slip up, if you were to be a human and eat some carbs again, because you're following a restricted diet, that basically kicks you out of ketosis, and then you have to go back through that keto flu again. So I don't know why people want to keep going through that. That just sounds horrible. I don't know if either of you done like low carb diets before?
Never. No, I didn't know that. I had no idea.
Horrible. You can also end up with a lot of situations with micronutrient deficiencies because you're not having the whole grains coming in. You're missing potentially magnesium and calcium, fiber, because your intake of fruits and vegetables is still limited. You do have some leafy greens, but not that much. And so you do have some issues there with the nutrient deficiencies. And it's not really known to be a long-term sustainable approach. The research shows that after 6 months, most people fall off because life happens. A sign that a diet doesn't work is that you cannot stick to it. I know we've talked about this in previous times that people come to us and are like, oh, I want to do keto again. It worked so well for me before. Well, did it actually work for you if you couldn't stick to it? Let that resonate for a moment. If you couldn't stick to it, was it actually successful? I don't think so. In some cases of ketogenic diet, when someone's relying more on animal sources of protein and fats, we can see an elevation of LDL similar to the carnivore diet. So there's a lot of similarities there in terms of the heart health ramifications. And then, as I mentioned, with the type 1 diabetes, it puts those individuals into a state of ketoacidosis, which can cause a lot of issues with just normal kidney function, which is very scary. I don't think that a lot of people understand the potential health ramifications of that. And what I always find interesting with the ketogenic diet is more looking at the exercise side of things and the athlete side of things. Because I know there was a period of time that we were seeing a lot of like endurance athletes switch to the ketogenic diet for proposed like, oh my gosh, the ketones are a slower digesting energy source. I'm going to use that for my energy performance. However, what we saw in a lot of those studies, and a lot of them were crossover design, is that when the person went back to eating carbs, they actually experienced some insulin resistance. So healthy athletic populations experiencing insulin resistance, and they couldn't actually get enough glycogen into their muscles. Like they were having issues with that. It wasn't necessarily a symptom that maybe lasted for that long. Again, they were only studying like shorter term, but something to really consider. So yes, the ketogenic diet is well supported in certain conditions and certain populations. However, we know that anything that cuts out a major macronutrient or food group, it is not sustainable, and that's not the way that we should be going about it. And you have to really make sure that if you were to embark on this, not that I'm recommending it, make sure you monitor your heart health, make sure you monitor your nutrients learn from my master's experience, it is not pleasant.
Yeah, I've never known anyone to do the ketogenic diet very long term.
No.
And for those that I have worked with that have done it relatively long term, usually they're coming to me because they went to the doctor, they got blood work done, and that blood work was not pretty. And they realized, I need to switch things up because this is having an impact on my health. It's actually potentially very negative. And so we had to transition them off of that diet because, their cholesterol was through the roof and things were not looking good.
It's crazy how a diet like that can gain so much popularity. And I think one of the biggest takeaways is what you were saying at the beginning, that people are more following an Atkins-style diet than keto. But keto is just this buzzword that has taken off like wildfire.
One of my biggest pet peeves with ketogenic diet and being someone who's celiac, so many times when I go to a coffee shop or go somewhere and they have a gluten-free item, is keto gluten-free? Or like if I'm on a plane, they give you a plain meal, they're like, oh my God, you're gluten-free, you must be keto. Here's the keto meal. And I'm like, I want carbs. Why?
They have keto meals on airplanes now?
Yes. And for about 50% of, or more than 50% of the airlines that I've flown on, when I ask for a gluten-free meal, in advance, they give me the keto meal. Because
Wow.
it's automatically gluten-free. And I'm like,
No.
shoot me in the foot. This is not pleasant. I can't eat any more cauliflower rice with butter.
So similar but different. I was a vegetarian for like 10 years. And I remember for some reason, everybody seems to think that if you're a vegetarian, that by default means that you want to eat mushrooms and eggplant all the time. Like two very slimy things.
Yeah.
And oftentimes those foods were used as like a protein replacement.
Oh my.
And they have like no protein. So, and very little calories too. And I remember just being like, why? The only option is this like slimy eggplant thing. And you're acting like this is good for me to eat. Like personally, I just don't love eggplant. I know some people do, but that's
I
a
do
me
not
thing.
love eggplant either. Do you like eggplant?
I'm in a Persian household. We eat a lot of eggplant.
Okay.
My mother-in-law makes it very well. So different scenario, but I can imagine that like similarly with the keto gluten-free thing, I can understand.
Yeah.
Sometimes you just learn to hate foods because that's the only option they give you.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
It's like the one choice that you get is the one that you don't.
So slimy food on a tangent. Do you like okra?
We were just talking about okra on one of our really long hikes because you have to talk about everything. And not a fan.
I don't mind okra. It has to be cooked properly because it is a slimy food.
Oh my God, so slimy. I have had it in some situations where I'm like, this is tolerable, but you're not going to see me like going to the store and buying okra. Deep fried okra.
Deep fry okra chips.
I like deep fried okra. Okra. Oh my gosh.
Yeah. Orca.
That would be keto. Deep fried okra.
Orca and okra.
Okra.
Okay, let's talk about the next one.
Okay.
Which
Intermittent
is
fasting. Drum roll.
intermittent fasting. I hope that didn't hurt all of your ears. So before, I feel like I got asked about keto all the time. And now I get asked about it a lot less. Now I get asked about intermittent fasting a lot more, and that's actually starting to taper down a little bit. People are asking about it a little bit less. Yeah, it used to be almost everyone I talked to.
Same. I've had that a lot with both personal training and nutrition clients.
Yeah, so it is, I think it's losing popularity a little bit. I think there's probably another fad that's going to pop up any minute now that
It'd be
will...
like bam in your face.
Yeah, it'll be the banana diet or something. Only eat bananas.
The
I don't know.
banana
Oh,
diet.
the grapefruit diet's going to come back to haunt us.
Oh, yeah.
Or cabbage soup diet.
Oh,
Yeah.
no. The 90s are coming for us.
They really are in so many ways.
Okay, anyways.
So
Back to intermittent fasting.
back to intermittent fasting. I'm not even going to bring up the fashion that has been coming back from the 90s that needs to stay in the 90s. But
The low-rise pants.
The what pants?
Low-rise pants.
Oh no.
those I don't mind as much as just like the straight up like giant cargo pants and stuff that I've been
I
seeing.
love those.
I do
See, I don't mind low rise pants, but I feel like I can't wear them in the same way as I used to wear them in the 90s. My body doesn't really appreciate them quite as much as it used to.
I'm just not used to having my butt crack feel the wind
Exposed.
upon it.
That's fair.
Okay, but back to intermittent fasting.
Okay, but
Rewind, fast forward.
We'll stop talking about my butt crack.
The year is 2025, and
about
we're
it.
talking about intermittent fasting.
Not Tara's butt crack.
No.
So we're not, this isn't a podcast about my butt crack.
No.
Okay, just checking. So let's talk about intermittent fasting instead of that. Many of you, I'm sure, have heard of intermittent fasting. It is something that is like a household term these days. Fasting has been around for ages and ages and ages. Technically, intermittent fasting is an eating pattern that alternates between eating and fasting windows. We all do this to some extent naturally because we all go to bed at night and we fast while we are sleeping, unless you have a sleep disorder where you eat in the middle of the night, which is a thing.
But that's why we call it breakfast. You
Right.
break your fast.
Exactly. You're breaking your fast with breakfast. So with intermittent fasting, we're sort of playing around with this concept and using specific strategies or protocols where you are fasting or not eating for designated periods of time and then eating for designated periods of time. There's a lot of different ways to do this, honestly, too many ways to list. There's one that is like a 16-8, so you're fasting for 16 hours, eating for 8 hours. There's a 5 and 2. That one is where you are fasting for 2 days of the week and eating for 5 days of the week. And then there's alternate day fasting where you kind of do it like every other day. Were there any other types you guys wanted to highlight?
There's a shorter window where instead of the 16-8, I've seen, what is it?
I've seen OMAD, so 1 meal a day, which is a form of intermittent fasting.
Okay.
You eat all your calories in 1 meal.
Yep. I've seen like a 24
Yeah.
ratio.
I've seen longer ratios too. Like I've seen, I guess, the
18-6 or
Yeah.
something.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, but like shorter
Longer.
windows of fasting. So it's
Oh.
like 12-12 or 14-10, that kind of
I've seen those
concept.
as well.
Which
Yeah.
is basically eating like a normal human. So what is actually the evidence, Tara? Because I'm curious to hear. I know I've kind of looked at it too, but I know you've recently done or watched a webinar on it, and you've recently done a little bit more research on it. So I want to hear your take on it.
Yeah, so there is some evidence to back up some potential benefits of different forms of intermittent fasting for some individuals. For some people, in some of the research, there was improved metabolic markers, so better insulin sensitivity, blood pressure, and oxidative stress reduction in people who have pre-diabetes specifically, so looking at that population. There was also reduced inflammation, so some trials show lower CRP and IL-6 levels. CRP is C-reactive protein. It's probably the most commonly looked at inflammatory biomarker that we see in lab tests. I often will recommend that people get that checked semi-regularly when they go in for blood work. Also cellular repair. So fasting might even enhance autophagy. That was primarily seen in animal studies though, not human studies. Intermittent fasting also helps support natural calorie reduction and hunger regulation. And I think that piece is the thing that I see my clients benefiting from the most if they are participating in a form of intermittent fasting, because most of the people that I work with are trying to lose body fat. And intermittent fasting basically creates this framework with very concrete rules to follow. I'm eating from X time to X time. I'm not eating from, starting at, let's say, 8 p.m. or whatever. And it's a hard rule. And for them, that helps them cut out maybe their evening snacking. And by default, they are eating maybe 300 to 500 calories less every day. And because of that, they end up losing weight. So it's the actual calorie reduction more than it is the actual intermittent fasting that's causing the result.
Do you find that, like, I know for myself, a lot of my clients, I always tell them that it's like, hey, let's try to shift the window. Because most people automatically always want to skip breakfast, and they want to use intermittent fasting as a way to skip breakfast. And so they're usually like, they eat at noon, they stop at like 10 p.m. I know for a lot of my clients, I usually encourage them to shift that earlier, eat calories earlier, and try to stop like later in the day. Like, do you find similar with a lot of your clients?
Almost 100% of them are the skip breakfast club.
Same.
Yeah. And we know that it's better to stop eating earlier in the evening. We know that it's better to not eat super close to bedtime. So if we can shift that time frame up a little bit earlier, that is definitely the more ideal way to be doing it. The other piece of it is that there is some evidence in colitis and Crohn's patients in active flare-ups to have strict eating and fasting windows, which can be helpful. You're essentially giving the digestive tract a little bit of a break, which can be very, very helpful. And I think that applies also to patients who are suffering from SIBO. So that is something to think about when we're talking about intermittent fasting as well. There are some potential risks for intermittent fasting. One of the main ones is that you can trigger some disordered eating behaviors in some individuals who might be susceptible to that. And I do find that oftentimes my clients who are interested in intermittent fasting or are practicing intermittent fasting also flag for some of those disordered eating behaviors, and it can be a little bit of like a red flag to investigate.
I see that with a lot of my clients. I tend to have several clients or patients that I work with who have disordered eating or history of disordered eating, and that is a massive thing that I see is this calorie restriction, but it's disguised as a restriction in their eating window. So it can often be disguised in that way. I see a lot of people trying to say exactly what you were saying. They'll skip breakfast, or they'll have very small amount of calories during a certain period of time, or refuse to eat because they're saying they're doing intermittent fasting, but are very, very much flagged or identify as having previous disordered eating patterns.
Yeah, right. I definitely see that. And so for that population, this is something that is not recommended for individuals that have struggled with disordered eating. It tends to be problematic. That's not across the board, not necessarily for every single person, of course, but something to be mindful of and to be cautious of. And one of the things that is a primary concern is the intentional suppression of hunger signals, which can be problematic if done excessively and for long term. So we don't want to be doing that. We want to be cautious there. Increased cortisol is another potential risk. Intermittent fasting might elevate stress in already overwhelmed individuals. So if we are restricting calories, if we are trying to prevent the body from getting nutrients in prolonged periods of time, that can actually cause a little bit of excessive stress in a person, particularly if they're already experiencing stress in other ways. Reduced athletic performance. So that's kind of my first thought when I think about high levels of stress, right? So if you're putting your body under a lot of stress physically by training very hard, and you're trying to intermittent fast, first of all, that's very difficult just from a logistical standpoint to try to kind of figure out when you can eat and when you can't eat, and also work that around a training cycle. But you're also exposing your body to high levels of stress from multiple different areas of your life. So that might not be a great way to manage your nutrition if you are an athlete.
Yeah, I was going to say, I know a lot of people when they come in and are doing intermittent fasting, a lot of times they're doing their training in the morning and they're not eating until noon. And that's really common. I think you've seen the same thing. And that's the big issue that we're worried about, is we want to be making sure we're training within that eating window so that we can fuel and recover properly. And that's the big contraindication. Something that's very, very similar that I just thought of right now is I have a lot of clients that will do Ramadan. And that is a form of intermittent fasting in some ways. And that's another area that I see a lot of reduced athletic performance, because a lot of them will try to actually work out during their fasting window, which is during the daytime. And for them, it's a little bit more of an extreme situation because they can't drink water even. So just something to think about.
Yes.
Intermittent fasting.
Yeah, I also have worked with clients who are fasting for that reason, and it's definitely something that requires quite a bit of strategy to juggle. And I think the other thing too, for people who, even if you're not an athlete, even if you're just a person who is trying to perform well, it's time and time again has been shown that we perform better when our bodies are fueled. And so that's something to consider if you are really trying to push yourself hard in the gym, if you're trying to make gains, if you're trying to PR, if you're trying to improve. Oftentimes we do perform better when we have fueled our bodies rather than when we show up unfueled and in a fasted state. Again, that's not necessarily across the board. If you are eating a higher carbohydrate meal in the evening before you go to bed, you will typically have at least some glycogen stores that you can work with in the morning. So that is a strategy that sometimes people will use if they are doing intermittent fasting and still working out in the morning before they have anything to eat. But I would say it's individual and see what feels right for you. It also depends on your priorities. The data regarding weight loss is very, very mixed with intermittent fasting. Some studies show no advantage at all when compared to caloric restriction. That is typically what I see with people that I work with too, just from a clinical perspective. The benefit is more the reduction in calories than it is the actual timing of your eating and how long you're fasting.
Same.
And sometimes you can see the opposite. Some people try to do intermittent fasting for weight loss and end up gaining weight because they're trying so hard to not eat until lunch, and they end up overeating or binging at lunch, and then eating a lot at nighttime because they're afraid they're not going to be able to eat for so many hours. And yeah, either they don't see any weight or they see weight gain. I've seen that with some of my clients as well.
Totally.
I've seen that too.
It can also be difficult to hit your macronutrient targets, particularly protein, if you are intermittent fasting. So again, strategy needs to be involved if you do intermittent fast, particularly if your eating window is very small, if you're fasting for very long periods of time. It can just be really difficult to get the nutrients in that you need in the quantities that you need them. New research shows that there are potentially harmful effects to female hormone balance as well. And Alicia, I think you wanted to share a little bit about that.
Yeah, so it was just, it goes back to actually the cortisol link. So they were talking about how intermittent fasting in some women, especially a more menopausal age, or the athletic population, it can cause a lot of issues. Well, the two populations. So cortisol, and you can see some issues with the female athlete triad, and then you can see with individuals who are undergoing hormonal change, they could put undue stress on their body, restrict the calories. So it's a lot of it's interlinked, but I know some researchers are saying hard and fast females shouldn't do intermittent fasting at all. I still think like it's very individual, but that's kind of like what I've seen. Like I know you were talking, Summer, about some of the intermittent fasting stuff that you were reading about as well.
I actually have had so many clients who have come and are doing intermittent fasting because of certain authors and books they read, especially during the peri and postmenopausal age, to the point where they're taking it as a hard and fast rule that yes, intermittent fasting is what you must do if you are in that stage of your life, if you are going through menopause, that you absolutely should be doing intermittent fasting, to the point where I've had clients in a very first meeting tell me that I have to be on board with them as a dietitian who works with this population quite a lot, that obviously I'm on board with intermittent fasting. And my response to that is always it's very, very individualized, and the science does support it, but now we're seeing, again, like Tara mentioned, a lot of science that is contradicting that information. So something just to keep in mind.
Yeah, I would say for my clients, and I wonder if this is something you also have seen or if not, but for my clients who are perimenopausal and menopausal and going through that shift and struggling with the weight gain that can sometimes occur, the thing that I have noticed to be most effective for the women that I work with is actually eating at regular intervals throughout the day.
I agree.
Making sure that they're getting nutrients in regularly, and more importantly, making sure that they're getting enough nutrition.
1,000% yes.
Yes, and I also make sure to stress the importance of protein and fiber for this
Agreed.
population as well. Peri and postmenopausal women especially need increased protein and fiber to support our bodies and what's going on and all the changes that go along with that.
Yeah, we are going to do a full episode on menopausal nutrition and like the evidence that's out there and like debunking some stuff. So stay tuned for that in the future.
That brings me to the bottom line for the intermittent fasting topic, which is really that it is an effective tool for some, but it needs to be aligned with the individual's health history and their lifestyle. So as we will say over and over again, it is very individually based. We see some benefits for some individuals, and for other individuals, it is not a practice that would be advised for them. So you have to make the best decision for yourself with the knowledge that you have, and B, potentially work with a professional who can help you make that decision to see if intermittent fasting is right for you.
So just a very quick recap on the 3 topics that we discussed. Carnivore diet is focused on extreme restriction, limited research, and is high risk for many people. The keto diet has clinical benefits in epilepsy for children and some in diabetes, but there is concerns with sustainability and sticking with that diet. And intermittent fasting, it's flexible and promising for some, but again, not universally beneficial. And some of the questions we want to ask before you're choosing a particular diet to follow or food eating plan is, what is the motivation behind trying this particular eating pattern? Can I sustain this without sacrificing mental or emotional or even performance health? Do I need clinical supervision? And are there more balanced options that I haven't explored?
Thanks for tuning into the Nutrition Digest podcast. Carnivore, keto, and fasting are more than just trends. They reflect our deep desire for structure, results, and simplicity in a noisy wellness world. But the science tells us that there's no one-size-fits-all approach. As we know, moderation and balance are the name of the game. If you know anyone who would benefit from today's episodes, give it a share. We'll keep helping cut through all the information and confusion going forward. And if you have any specific diets that you've heard of that you want us to debunk, feel free to reach out to us through Instagram or leave us a comment below. Thanks for tuning in.